Hello everyone. The topic of this video is comments and indentation. So first let us look at comments. So comments are used to explain the code and make it more readable. Okay. So as we saw earlier, there are two types of programming languages, low level languages and high level languages. So Python, we saw that it is a high level language. So when you're writing code in a high level language, you must remember that you're not writing as much for the machine to understand as you're writing to communicate your idea to other human beings. Okay, because when you're working in a large organization and you're adding code to a large code base, it is very important that whatever code you write is able to be used by someone else. And if someone else has to use your code, when they read your code, they must understand exactly what your thought process was when you made certain decisions, or the way you actually solved a problem. If that is not clear, if there is some mistake, or if they want to modify your code, or add some functionality, they cannot do that unless they understand what is happening. Okay, so comments are a very important tool in making sure that you actually write down what your thought process was within the code itself. Okay, and it is not only for others, but when you start programming, actually you'll realize that even suppose you write a piece of code today, 6 months down the line, when you look at that same piece of code, you won't actually remember exactly what your thought process was when you were writing that code. So even for yourself, so that your code has a long life and it can be reused again and again, you must make sure that is properly commented. Okay, so these comments, they do not get executed, they just add some extra information, and we use the hash or pound symbol to write comments in Python. So you start a line with hash, and this is a comment, this is an example. So these two lines, they won't get executed, and after that I have a call to a print function. So now if I run this, it's getting connected. So you can see that this has been executed. So you can also add, so wherever you put this hash, so starting from there, the rest of the line becomes a comment. So this is a call to print function. This is a comment I've added after this function call. You'll get the same output because this is a comment and this does not make any difference. Okay. So now if you want to add longer comments, you can use multi-line comments. So one way is you just add, this is the more common way, where you just add a hash in front of each line. Another way is to use triple quotes. Okay, you use either 3 single quotes or 3 double quotes. Okay, so here, for example, comments are written using 3 single quotes. It starts with 3 single quotes and ends with 3 single quotes, and it can span multiple lines. If I actually print this, you'll see that only this line gets executed and this does not make any difference. Similarly, you can also use double quotes for this. So here if I say, all right. So the next thing that we are going to look at is indentation in Python. Okay. So what is indentation? Indentation is the white space which is left at the beginning of a line. Okay. So for example, in this line, if you see, code is beginning right from the first character of the line, whereas here we have a few characters of white space at the beginning of this line. So this is called as indentation. So in general, if you look at other programming languages like C or Java, they also use indentation, but there it is used only for making the code more readable. It does not have any particular functional significance and it is not compulsorily enforced. Okay, it is only used to make the code more readable. But in Python, indentation is very important because it is built into the language. You have to use indentation, and if you make mistakes in the usage of indentation, your code will throw syntax errors. Okay, so what is this indentation used for? This indentation is basically used to define code blocks. Okay, so for example, this is an if statement. Okay, so we will be looking at if statements in the future. But what this if statement has is, it has a condition, and if this condition is true, it is followed by a code block, which is a sequence of statements. So it can have multiple statements. It is a huge block. So how do we define what is the start of the block and end of the block? That is by the use of indentation. Okay, so here there is no indentation. So now here I am using 4 spaces of indentation. So whichever lines have at least 4 spaces of indentation after the beginning of this statement, all of those will belong to this if block. Okay, so all these statements will belong to that block. Now after that, whenever I encounter a statement which does not have that indentation, so that marks the end of the block. Okay, so here I am encountering a blank statement, so that marks the end of the block. Or here, suppose if I had, this is the end. So we saw here that at the beginning of the block there were 4 spaces, and in this, and rest of the lines of code here also, they have at least 4 spaces. But this line here, it has 0 spaces, so this marks the end of the block. Okay, so but 4 is not a number that you have to use compulsorily. You can use even 1, but you have to make sure that the rest of the lines also match this. Okay, so first let us run the example that was already there. So if I run this, so there is no error, and so A is false, so this was not printed. If I change this to 1, so you see that this also got printed. So now what I'll do is, I'll change this to a single space. Now if I run this, so it says indentation unexpected indent. Okay, so here if you see, for the if block to mark the starting of the if block, I used 1 space of indent here. Okay, but after this, here what I'm doing is I'm creating a new variable b. Okay, so this does not need a separate block. This does not belong to any particular block as such, but I'm still using indentation here. So that is why he's complaining that this is an unexpected indent. But if I change this also to the same level of indentation, if I use a single space for all the rest of the statements, so now it doesn't complain again because these are all at the same level. Okay, but now coming here, so this print, so this so inside this if statement, I'm defining another if statement. Okay, so this one will have another block which is specific to it. So for that, again I have to use indentation. So here I've used 1 space, but I can also use 2 spaces. So now here, if I suppose say another print b, so now again this is throwing an indentation error because it does not match any outer indentation level. Okay, so what is this error? So what did I say earlier? So if you look at from the perspective of this if statement, the body of this if statement has to have 2 spaces of indentation. So okay, now here I am using only 1 space of indentation. So so that means this is not matching the indentation of this if block. So that means this is the end of this if block. Okay, so now once I end this if block, so this statement must belong to some outer block, right? So if this print statement is not part of this if block, it must be part of some other outer block of which this if block is a part of. Okay, but in that case, the indentation of this print statement, this line number 8, should match the indentation of the outer block. But that is not the case here. The outer block has a a single space of indentation in all these lines, whereas this has two lines of indentation. Okay, so that is incorrect. So that is why it is causing this error, that it does not match any outer indentation level. Whereas if I change this and make it a single space so that it matches the indentation of the outer block, this error will go away. Okay, so that is the basic idea behind indentation. Now indentation is also used to define any kind of block. For example, while defining a function, suppose if I define this function square root of x, okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm defining a function, and here this is called the header of the function. I've defined the name of the function, and now here I'm defining the body of the function. Okay, so this body can be multiple lines. Okay, so I can say print x and then return something. So this has two lines. So now I have to define, I have to mark where the function starts and where it ends. Okay, so how do I do that? I'll again do it using indentation. So here I'm using two spaces of indentation. So all the statements which are inside this function, I'll use at least two spaces of indentation. And if I have some other block, for example, if I have some if statement, for that I'll use separate additional indentation. But if otherwise, I'll use only two spaces of indentation for the whole function. Okay, now if I call this function here, okay, there is an error. This name here, the spelling is wrong. So you can see that this is being printed here. So how does it know? So here you can see that because the earlier we had two spaces of indentation, whereas here we have zero spaces, and this matches the rest of the code which also has zero spaces of indentation. So you can know from this that the function has ended and this belongs to the outer block. Okay, so that is how indentation basically works, and I would like you to play around with on your own by using different spaces and seeing what are the kinds of errors come up and trying to fix them. This will give you a feel for what are the different errors that arise in different situations. Okay, that is all for this video. Thank you.